Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Friday, February 7th, 2025. I'm John Bodhoritz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And joining us today, veteran of veteran journalists, the host of the Two-Way platform, which features a morning meeting show that is live on YouTube at 9 a.m. Every morning with his co-stars Dan Turrentine and Sean Spicer, and then evening events at around 6, or so. You moved them around now, 6, 7, 8. Author, daily columnist, author of the Wide World News newsletter, Mark Halperin. Hi, Mark. Thanks for joining us again.
Good to be with you. The evening show is pretty much on at 6 p.m., except when it's not, but pretty much 6 p.m.
So 2 shows a day, newsletter in the morning, and you, of course, a veteran of decades of Washington, watching Washington reporting, the author of the 2 huge best-selling books on political campaigns, Game Change and Double Down, from 2008, 2012. And you have, I've said this before when you're on the podcast, you had a show on Bloomberg. I went on in like November, December of 2015. You said to me, how do you think Trump's doing? I said, he's going to fade. You know, it's like this. And you said, I've never seen anything like this. I don't think he's going anywhere. I think he's going to win the nomination. And then I don't know what's going to happen. And I was like, that's what happens when you go and you drink the Kool-Aid in New Hampshire and all of that. And you were the first person really that I knew who actually said this was going to happen. I've kept that in my mind throughout the last 8 years. And so when I read you in your Wide World of News newsletter every morning and hear you on your podcasts during the day, say that this term that began 2 weeks ago or 2.5 weeks ago, things are happening at a pace, a speed, and with a sort of policy focus, let's say, even if it's not, like detailed focus, in a way that you have never seen before, and that he has everybody dizzied and on their back heels, Democrats, Republicans, people on the Hill, everywhere, that Trump is innovating or doing something completely drastically different from what anybody would have expected and where he is going. I take you not only at your word, but I think you have established that your understanding of the Trump movement and the Trump dynamic and all of that is very deep and old. So having said old in relative terms, since it's only 10 years, but that 10 years is a millennium in politics. So can you lay out for us what it is, aside from the totally obvious that, there's 10 policies a day being issued, what it is that you're seeing that you haven't seen or that no one has actually attempted before?
Thank you for your nice words and for having me back. I'm paid to not be baffled or speechless. That's been my job. I am baffled and somewhat speechless. I've been thinking in the last couple of days, is there anything in my career as a journalist that I've covered that I'd compare to this? And the answer is no. I've covered, presidential campaigns, governments, Oklahoma City bombing, O.J. Simpson trial. I've covered lots of big, complex stories. I find this to be extraordinary and singular. I think that we're covering and talking about a very small percentage of what's actually happening. And I think for the reasons I've discussed at length in my writing and on Two-Way, this is a unique presidency for so many reasons. And we're seeing the manifestation of that now. It's in some ways like a first-term presidency. He's coming in, starting this term with much more energy, momentum, newness, and arrested staff. That's not like a second-term president. Right. You think about the first weeks of the second term of Clinton, Bush, and Obama. It's nothing like this for obvious reasons. But it's also is a second term presidency in the sense that he's experienced. He knows more about how to do the job and what he wants. And he also had 4 years off when he wasn't sitting in courtrooms or being shot at. he had a lot of time to think about how he wanted to do this job and how to enact a revolution. And you know, the theater of it and the personality and the historical narrative arc are all, of course, super compelling. But what matters is the real lives of real people and the impact this is going to have on not just American government and the world, but American history. And I think on that score, based on the early returns here after a couple weeks, this turns the Reagan Revolution into a joke. It makes the notion that George W. Bush came to Washington to really shake things up. It's there's no comparison what they're doing, and it's some combination of careful planning that was hidden from view for the most part, and ad hocery that is being mostly successful because this is open field running. I'm very reluctant to use sports metaphors, but I think it's the right one. This is Travis Kelce catching the ball on his own 40 and looking around and seeing there's no one near him. And he's just barreling downfield. The Democrats are nowhere on the field. The press is nowhere on the field. The liberal interest groups are nowhere on the field. And the reasons for their being so ill prepared, I think, will be studied eventually. But the reality of it now is he is just I've never seen anything like not just the activity, but the inability of his opponents to forget stopping him. They're barely, with a few exceptions, even slowing him down.
So, you say he came to town this time to enact a revolution. And I remember in 2016, the word was that he would get together with Paul Ryan, who was then the leader of the House. And he said, look, I just want to be president. You come with an agenda, agrees with my agenda, we'll do it. It turned out that was not true, that he did not follow Paul Ryan's lead, that he didn't listen to Paul Ryan. But in place of Paul Ryan's actually relatively careful set of ideas about how to enact some parts of the Trump revolution, he didn't have any idea about how to enact parts of the Trump revolution or what he wanted to enact. And now, as you say, after 4 years, what's surprising to me is how revolutionary he is, in the sense that I understand wanting to do a lot of stuff and just going absolutely hog wild as a strategy. You want to dizzy your opponents, you want to keep them off kilter, you want to show your energy, particularly in comparison to the last guy. But this all does seem to be, at least in the first 2 weeks, all in one direction, and it is the direction of that part of the Republican or conservative movement over the last 25 years that has said things like, what we need to do? We need to shut down USAID, or we need to get rid of the Department of Education. We need to reduce the size of the federal workforce by half. And all of that, as we sit around at think tanks and in our small magazines like Commentary Notes and make these proposals, and nobody actually ever believes that they're going to be enacted because it's just too hard and the status quo is too present, and you unintended consequences may be too vast. And he's come in and he's doing all of it, or he's like rolling the boulder down the hill, and I don't think that's anything that anybody anticipated. I mean, it's what MAGA's fever dream was, but I don't think if you sat down with people who know Susie Wiles and Chris LaCivita and the people who do this sort of thing, that you would have said, is he going to just sort of announce that there are going to be 290 employees at USAID 17 days into his administration? And they would say, of course not. What do you mean? We're just getting our CLAG. We need to get everybody confirmed or whatever. So that's, to me, is the surprise, is that he wants to do it, and that he didn't start with, as he is now apparently going to start with, no taxes on tips, or the things that things that he innovated during the campaign, policies that were heterodox, like no taxes on tips, and no taxes on Social Security and that sort of thing. Could have started there. That's what he ran on. Didn't really run on USAID, but that's not where he went. And so that to me is the why, or what animal cunning does he understand
Yeah.
that made him understand that this was the agenda to go at?
Right. So first of all, there is a group of people who said this is what was going to happen. It was the people who said Project 2025 would be the Bible of Trump's second term. They were more right than not, in some ways. Um, so
But Trump yelled about
yeah,
that. Trump said he wanted to
I know,
arrest the
I
people
know,
who did Project
I
2025.
know, I know, I
Yeah,
know. It was politically untenable. I think the biggest mistake right now that a lot of people make about this agenda, which is the same mistake that the press has been making about Donald Trump since 2015, is most of what they're doing is quite popular. There are unpopular aspects of it, and there are dangerous aspects regarding civil liberties, regarding continuity of government, regarding the health of people in the United States and around the world. There are a lot of dangers here. But the core things they're doing, cutting the size of government, shutting down the border, um, uh, uh,
gender.
using gender stuff, using America's leverage to make other countries bow to the whims of the United States and the desires of the United States. These are all very, very popular. They're not popular with the so-called extreme MAGA base only. They're very popular with probably 70% of the country. And so it would be one thing if this revolution were for the extreme MAGA base only. It's not very popular in Chevy Chase, Maryland. It's not very popular with the New York Times. And again, I say the press must be vigilant in scrutinizing this because there are real dangers here at home and abroad to what they're doing potentially. But it's a popular agenda for the most part, and not just populist. Why is he doing it? Because he wants to go down in history. It's super important to him. He knows his first term would not make him considered, certainly by liberal historians, but even by conservatives, as one of the greatest presidents of all time. And that's what he wants to be, one of the most consequential. And and I think you three understand, but the New York Times doesn't understand, and Blue America doesn't understand. He went through 8 years, first as president and then out of office, being threatened, including his liberty being threatened by what he and his supporters consider to be the deep state, the entrenched bureaucracy, the iron triangle of liberal institutions, democratic politicians, and the media. And and it's not just retribution against the Iron Triangle. It's an attempt to dismantle its ability to control America. And they have extraordinary momentum even before he took office because of the cause and effect of how he won the election, which the dizzying changes, parallel dizzying changes. The NFL, for the first time in years, not having end racism in the end zone of the Super Bowl written in the end zones. That's one of 1,000 examples I can give you of how universities, corporations, other groups who previously were part of the Iron Triangle are basically saying we surrender, and they're riding that wave.
Can I ask you a question that I get asked and don't know the answer to? You might. Going back to something you said before about the campaign and what people expected, how, how much of what's happening, the details, does Trump know about and specifically want and is directing, and how much is he empowered people to do to complete the goals that he wants, which is, cutting a lot of stuff and getting rid of DEI and waste and stuff like that. And it's, Doge sort of running wild. And the same question about Rubio, which is like, how much did Rubio expect himself, who was always in line for Secretary of State and was on a shortlist, on a VP shortlist? How much did he expect of this USAID stuff and all that? And how much is he controlling and presiding over it? Like, is this happening around him, or is he, that's, I think, what people wonder. How much are Trump, Rubio, these guys, how much are they directing this? How much did they expect? How much of this is planned? And how much of this is sort of Doge has been let off a leash? And, as long as they don't cross certain red lines, Trump is basically okay with it.
Well, it's perfectly framed, Seth. I mean, those are the right questions. Um, I don't have a great answer for you. I have a good answer, but not a great one. Um, Directionally, Trump is all over it. Very the broad direction and the implications of it. He's all over, and he's episodically involved in the details. When something's good, I mean, Trump sees it all through the prism less of policy than of the media, right? So if something happening that's good, like his press secretary is doing a very good job objectively. She just is for the goals that they have. He's very aware of that. He's very aware of her reviews. He's very aware of how the press hates Elon. And he's got mixed feelings about that, I believe. And when things go poorly, like the executive order on suspending all payments, he's aware of that. But is he aware of every little implementation detail, or exactly what Elon's young men are doing? I doubt it. That's just not his way. He's doing a lot of meetings that we don't hear about. They're not on his public schedule. So he's really busy, and he's in this mood that close Trump observers are noting is different, a product of winning, a product of the assassination attempt. So he's not sweating the details. Um, and and I think that that will be the pattern. He'll be engaged when things are good or bad. Otherwise, he's a pretty good delegator as a manager. He was when he ran the Trump organization. The Rubio question is one I've been asking people about. Um, there's a lot of uncertainty, not just for Rubio but for the cabinet. And there is a clearly, again, I can't quantify it for you, but I can tell you that even the big four cabinet members have been frequently cut out of things, that they're learning about things. Like, for instance, Rubio has been reported learned about the president's Middle East proposal when he said it. So that's not normal. Normally, you flew your Secretary of State into that, and over weeks of interagency meetings. And I know that the Treasury Secretary has not been aware of everything that's happened that would be part of his brief. Some of that has been purposeful. I know some of that is just the chaos and the ad hocery that's gone on. But the cabinet's actually been remarkably empowered. Every administration, as you know, there's a question of how much will be centralized in the White House, how much will be delegated to the cabinet secretaries. The Obama administration was very tight towards the White House. This administration so far, even though the cabinet secretaries aren't necessarily briefed on everything, they've been given a lot of authority. I mean, Marco Rubio is not wanting for things to do or a portfolio. Um, and I don't know whether the practice of these couple weeks will be the practice for the duration of the administration, or at least for the foreseeable future, or not, because again, there's just so much ad hocery involved here. I will say one of the underrated things about the administration is, or two things. One is these cabinet secretaries, for the most part, are really great communicators. No surprise, because some of them have been television hosts, and they generally is part of the job requirement. But Trump loves that. He loves the fact that they're on Fox. One of them's on Fox almost every moment, and so they're contrary to the sort of conventional wisdom of Trump likes to be the only star. Trump likes the fact that there's a bunch of stars. The other thing is Rubio, the vice president, a huge story about his influence, the national security advisor. They're very, very empowered. They're doing a lot of stuff. They may not be on everything that's in the news, like the USAID details. But like Musk, they got a lot to do, and they're running in an open field as well.
Hey, Mark, you said something very early on that depending on one's level of paranoia could be ominous or benign. You said you think we're seeing only a fraction or a very small part of what's actually happening in the administration in the White House. Could you expand a little on what you meant by that? Is this something to worry about, or this is a sort of run of the mill concern?
I think as a citizen who if you have eyes and ears, you can see that again, their regard for civil liberties, their regard for the feelings and livelihoods of millions of people who happen to be government employees, but the cavalier way in which they're being treated and kind of the disrespectful way. Um, uh, and again, the reality that you look at Twitter when Musk came in and made dramatic changes. Like a couple days, Twitter didn't really work, and that's fine if it's a social media platform, but less good if it's the federal government. And the thing they did, reportedly sending around an unclassified system the names of CIA agents. There's some very scary stuff potentially. From a reporter's point of view, um, there are a lot of good stories out there. Like everybody's on, it's like the second graders in the soccer ball. Everybody's on the USAID story. You can read 15 stories a day in the New York Times about that. There's a lot of other stuff happening. As a busy person, um, I can tell you, I'm sitting in my inbox 7 tips right now. I counted them this morning that I really should be looking into about people who Trump has met with, about policies that are being pursued but not getting covered, about how things are going, particularly in the national security front. I just don't have time to do them to look into them all. And some of those may be scary. Some of them may be benign. Some of them may be fantastically interesting stories and too soon to say what they mean. Um, but that's what I base that on is in it just in my own incoming. Every time I talk to someone who's been in the West Wing, because there are a lot more visitors to the West Wing that have been reported. Every time I talk to someone, they say, "Oh my God, you wouldn't believe who I saw coming out of the Oval Office, or hanging out in the West Wing, or talking to the National Security Advisor." And so that's what I base that on.
There was this moment in the Gaza press conference where he said, I've talked to all these people in the Middle East, and they all love this idea. So there are two possibilities, one of which is he's lying. He didn't talk to anybody in the Middle East, and he just said, I've talked to people in the Middle East. Or he talked to people in the Middle East. It's just not who you think he talked to.
Right.
Like, for all we know, he talked to a friend of Jared's who has a hotel
Yeah.
in Dubai, or he spoke to Ike Perlmutter, who is the former head of Marvel, who basically lives right next to Mar-a-Lago, is a billionaire, and said,
In my
as far
experience,
as I'm
in my experience, he lives on the patio at Mar-a-Lago.
the patio of Mar-a-Lago. He's a 81-year-old man. He's a very angry Israeli guy, and he may have said, "Yeah, just raise the place." It's
Yeah.
not that he so that um, when you say there's a lot more going on, he has his own
Yeah.
network. He has his own kitchen cabinet. What's
Yeah.
interesting here is we don't really know who the kitchen cabinet is yet, outside people whom he is conferring with. And, I'm struck by this also. David Brooks, Catherine Rampell, a couple of other people have written things, and David is like one of my 2 or 3 oldest friends, but he wrote this piece last week about how Trump is stupid. He's stupid. Look how he's doing this. He's stupid. I'm struck by the fact that, well, you say, the devil's in he's not all that detail oriented. Things are happening, some of it, but he doesn't know all of it. Things are going down the hill. I'm struck by how much he knows, by which I mean he has these executive order press conference, where he's signing the executive orders and the press is there. And I don't know how he takes in information. I gather he doesn't read. People say you just have to show him pictures. That's how, all this stuff that makes him sound like an idiot. You show him a chart, you show him a photograph, or maybe it's just oral. Maybe he takes things in through his ears. But he has 10,000 factoids in his head that he can pull off the shelf if you ask him about even one, if you try to trip him up about one of these policies about USAID, about gender, or about what's going on here or there, and he is not unprepared.
He is conversant.
He is conversant, and he that is
Uh,
this. I don't know what there.
Yeah.
That thing of saying, boy, he's an idiot is part of his superpower,
Yeah.
because
I,
they're
I,
saying he's an
yes.
idiot and being contemptuous toward him. And then he is, just as you say, they're standing there on the field while Travis Kelce runs down the sideline saying,
Yeah.
what an idiot this guy is. I
Yeah.
can't believe how stupid he is. He's going
Yeah.
to reach the whirlwind. Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to say something else positive about Donald Trump. I don't want people to take away from this that I'm his press secretary, or I don't see negatives about him personally or about what's happened. Okay, so I want to make that clear, and I've mentioned some of the negatives I see. I could mention more. Along with saying since 2015 that Trump's agenda is for the extreme MAGA base, wrong. I've laughed for since 2011 when I started talking to Trump about politics. I laugh when people say he's stupid. He's got a human intelligence level akin to Bill Clinton's, which is high praise. The guy understands that, and he gets facts wrong all the time. But John, I think you're right to highlight these rolling press conferences. He is conversant in the details of these things. People ask him stuff, he knows about it. He understands what they're asking about. He understands the nuance of it in most cases. And and we all know there's different kinds of intelligence. Donald Trump is not stupid. He's not stupid. He's got a weird mind. You know, Hillary Clinton said about her husband that when he dies, people should study his brain. I'd say the same thing about Donald Trump. Never met anybody like him. But on this question of doing the job and understanding the details and sitting there with the White House press corps playing pepper with them, bring it on. Ask me anything you want. Give me more and more and more. It's because he's going to have answers for everything. And he's not an uninformed person. He's not a stupid person. And to the contrary, again, unique. I just can't say this enough. I've been writing it, not daily, but all the time. Unique circumstance. President for 4 years, then 4 years off to think about how could I do the job better because I'm going to get it back. How could I do it better? And who could I hire? And how can I avoid the mistakes I made the first time? And by the way, if I'm not in prison and I'm not under indictment or special counsel investigation, I could have a lot of bandwidth to do even more stuff. So I've said he's the second best presidential candidate I've ever covered after Clinton. And people who hate Trump tell me, "Oh, you're ridiculous." I say, "You think Trump's stupid, and you think he only caters to the extremes? He must be a great candidate because he overcame those two things." He is a very skilled political person. He's a very skilled manager. He's very smart, and he's in this unique position in our lifetime of having a second term with the benefits of 4 years off to think about how to do it better.
He said two things. He said when his tax returns were leaked and released by the New York Times, and they went through them with a fine tooth comb looking for something that they could nail him on to criminally. And people went to him and said, look, you didn't pay taxes for 18 years based on $1 billion loss. And he said, well, that just proves I'm a genius.
Correct.
People were contemptuous of that. What part of that wasn't true? He
I
is
use that
somebody who
example.
figured
I
out
use the example.
how to take the worst thing that could happen to most people and make it the thing that funded his life for almost 2 decades. That's, so
And which in
I
my
just mean like
yeah.
having contempt for him or condescending to him is the single greatest political mistake I think I've seen in my lifetime.
Well, again,
Thinking that he
I would
couldn't survive the indictments,
I
even
would
the,
I agree,
yeah,
I agree
okay,
with you, but I would couple it with the other thing, which is underestimating the appeal of his agenda.
right. And now
Those
I wanted to
those
go to
two
there,
things. Yeah.
right? Because I've told the story also, but in '94, I was a little involved in after '94 in sort of helping to promote the agenda of the Republican Revolution, the Gingrich the
Yeah.
contract with America. And the thing that people forget, because it was so controversial, it was so this, it was so that, is that as Gingrich would say, every single one of the 10 points of the contract with America was a 70% issue. Now, he was going on Frank Luntz's polling. Frank Luntz often wrote questions to get answers that he would like prefer. But according to, they did not put anything in the contract with America that did not score at least 70% popularity. We saw that just the other day. He signs the order on gender in sports. Harry Anton goes, it's an 80% issue. People are screaming. People, liberal elites have been brainwashed into the idea that this is the wave of the future. It's an 80% issue. They set him up to have that photo of him standing there holding the executive order with 30 girls surrounding him like he was, I don't know, St. Francis of Assisi, and they just handed that to him.
Most incredible photo op I've ever seen.
Yeah, but they know it's an 80%. How much money did the Biden administration or the Biden and Harris campaign spend on polling? $100 million, $150 million on focus groups and polling. They see the same data. They saw the same data.
Well, and you could say the same thing about the border, both of which Peggy Noonan write about today. That just how inexplicable it is that the Democratic Party, which is now silent on these issues, if you listed the 20 top reasons why Harris lost and Trump won, you'd have to put that as one of the top 20, not just in and of itself, but what it said about the image of the Democratic Party and their failure to say, you know what, we're on the wrong side of an 80-20 issue, so maybe we need to figure that out. And while Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were fine with that, Bill Clinton and Barack Obama would never have done that. You cannot be on the wrong side of an 80-20 issue and do nothing. You don't necessarily need to do a 180, but you need to do something. And they did nothing. And again, people look at that photo op and that executive order and say, oh, MAGA extremism. No, 80-20.
So Politico had this piece yesterday or the day before yesterday about social conservatives because of the prayer breakfast. Trump went to the National Prayer Breakfast, which has traditionally for conservatives and Republicans been a time to pay obeisance to the importance of the pro-life movement. And that's not what Trump did. Now, Trump may think he has in his pocket, I appointed 3 judges, they overturned Roe v. Wade. That's, don't ask for any more from me. I did my service to this movement for 50 years. I'm going to talk about other stuff. And so he talked about girls and gender and transgender and sports. And it's like, oh, you see, he's not talking about abortion. He's bringing them into the MAGA fold and making them his warriors. And this again gets to this incredible misunderstanding about the right and how he is consolidated on the right, which is the right doesn't see a difference between, if you'll put it this way, abortion and trans. These are aspects or faces of the same, as we'd say, radical agenda to remake what it means to be human, that people on the right have been standing against for half a century. And that Trump knows this. They know it. Liberals can't get it into their heads. And so there are these two aspects, which is he's doing whatever he's doing, and then either he's not getting the right kind of blowback, or their blowback is simply, it's like an accelerant. It just adds to his fire, because that, if they're going to continue on this path against him, he's got a free field. He's got more troops. He's just going to win over more and more people. Now it is 17, 18 days. So I just want to go to the negatives here. Okay. Like, all of this could go down in 6 months. We could have forgotten these 2 weeks because the economy won't improve and the tax bill will come a cropper, and somehow Democrats will wrest control of the House because of a couple of car accidents and special elections or whatever. And suddenly he won't be able to get anything done. There'll be investigations into him. The economy won't improve. Inflation will go up, and it'll all look like a disaster. And I think after the triumphalism of the first, 30 minutes of this podcast, we should sort of delve into that, one of the reasons that people don't go this fast, this easily, this quickly is they've had a lifetime of training in a certain level of political prudence. Like, like put your oar gingerly in the water before you start, rowing like crazy. And that he's gone this wildly other direction. But there's a reason that people are usually like that, right? There's a reason that prudence is the watchword when you're getting your policy, when you're getting your boat in the water and getting ready to, row for 4 years. Is how cold is it? What are the currents like? Is there a storm coming? He's decided to ignore all that, and it's not like it can't happen.
No, I think your list was excellent, but I think you left some stuff off just for the sake of time. There could be foreign crises. There's all sorts of things that could happen, and you think about the probably the most recent analog to this, 2009, in the Republican Party. It took them about 6 months to, for the Tea Party to come up, and for the counter offensive to be energized, and of course led to Barack Obama being in his party being very beaten badly in the midterm. So yes, analyzing what's happened doesn't mean this run will continue forever by any means. And particularly, I mean, you mentioned it, you alluded to it, but particularly solving the question of how do you get the Republican Party to stay virtually unanimous in Congress to pass the reconciliation bill to deal with the border and taxes and energy and other issues, and at the same time work with Democrats on raising the debt ceiling and avoiding a government shutdown? I mean, I don't know anybody who knows how you do either of those, let alone both of them virtually simultaneously. So he's got big challenges ahead. But just talking about the 3 weeks, it suggests a lot of action, a lot of momentum, and again, a failure of those who want to stop him to have a clue about how to stop him so far.
Another thing about the how the field is clear before him is also that, and it's only been 3 weeks, but he hasn't yet been tested in terms of foreign crisis. No one's invaded anyone. We don't know what Iranian response there's going to be to his Middle Eastern plans and so on. It's not all going to be his designing our day-to-day life for 4 years. Extraneous things will happen that he will then have to respond to and fit himself into, and that's going to change the face and the coloration of the administration at some point.
100%, and it could happen soon.
Right.
But I always look for asymmetries, right? Who has an asymmetrical advantage? And for years, one of the great democratic asymmetrical advantages in government and politics was media control, right? And we saw during the campaign, this has been much discussed, but I think still underappreciated and understood, is the degree to which the liberal organs, not just the New York Times and CBS News, but Hollywood and social media, are now uh, really diminished in their influence, and the organs of the right are increased in their influence, and we're in uncharted territory, which is to say, when this government lies or missteps or has a crisis, they've got all these organs that are not going to say it's a crisis. They're going to say something else. They're either going to change the subject or say this is actually part of Trump's master plan, whatever it is. We don't know what that looks like because it's never happened before in modern American history. And I think we have to keep that in mind in as we game out. What if there's a foreign crisis? What about the challenges ahead in Congress? It's just not going to be covered the way it used to be covered in the lives of a lot of consumers. The other thing is Trump's not running for re-election, and while he does care about doing well in the midterms for obvious reasons, there's just a different dynamic in terms of, does he really care what his approval rating is? He cares personally, but it doesn't necessarily matter that much to the metrics of success that he has. It doesn't matter zero, but it doesn't matter nearly as much as if he were still going to run for re-election.
One of the things that the Democrats seem to be struggling with, one of the sort of underplayed parts of this is that, you talked about the fact that Donald Trump had this sort of 4 years off, which is like having a bye week, in the NFL playoffs or whatever, right? You get a week to watch everybody else play and see what they do and to plan your plan of attack. But the other thing that it did was it left Republicans with a leader in the opposition, right? Republicans were out of power, but not leaderless, because everybody knew Donald Trump was going to run again. And unless something, maybe he was going to be beaten in the primary, maybe not, unless something happened. But at a certain point, it just sort of became like watching the same train that we did in 2016. It was just rolling and nothing was going to stop the train. And what that did was that made everybody try to stay in line with Trump, right? I mean, nobody wanted to cross Trump, not just because he was still popular, but because the 50-50 might be president again in a few years. How does that affect, what the Democrats are, were expecting this to look like, right? They don't have a leader right now, really, in the wilderness. They're sort of in the wilderness. In a lot of ways, that's a more normal situation than what Republicans had, right? Which is, the possibility that somebody could be an off and on president with 4 years out of office in between. So the Democrats
remember that in 2009, the person who arose, interestingly enough, as the voice against Obama's radical, all fronts agenda was oddly Dick Cheney. March, April, Dick Cheney gets up and starts making these speeches. He has no constituency. He's not going to run for president. Nothing. He just started saying, this is dangerous. I've never seen anything like this. I don't know. He was like, it was like Hyde Park Corner. He just got up on a soapbox and started to speak. And he was the first person, because of course the legislative leaders were sort of trying to figure out what on earth McConnell, whoever, what on earth they were supposed to do, how they were supposed to maneuver in this. McConnell had 41, whatever he had. Republicans barely had anybody left in the Senate to fight, and so something can happen organically. There's no structure to create a leader of the Democratic Party, and the Democrats also have this weird. They make a terrible mistake, I think, is what they're going to do. What they think they can default to in odd ways is like Rachel Maddow. Oh, Rachel Maddow's back on TV 5 nights a week. She'll do it. That'll be great. But that's all part of the entertainment complex stuff. So I don't know. We'll see. They're not going to be defenseless forever. I mean, that this is, they're on their heels and dazed and like on the canvas a little bit, but they're not knocked out. They're not out of the game.
Right. And so it's not even
Trump has a
3 weeks
one-seat majority in the House,
Yeah. Seth, I think what you said was just so brilliant in terms of how you framed it. And obviously he was helped stay relevant, not just because of his hold over the movement and the power and the demonstration of the power of his endorsement in primaries, which was dispositive in almost every case, but because the Democrats made an historic error in pursuing him through lawfare and elevating him and rallying people around him. And he was not ambivalent about it. And again, it's a small thing, but I think it's symbolically important. And you'll see it again on display Friday night at Mar-a-Lago. He has the Mar-a-Lago, he has the plane, he had the continuing Secret Service protection. Like, there's never been an ex-president with the aspiration to be president again with all that, stuff that allows him to look like the president in waiting. He's He's not living in like a condo in Florida, right? He's living in Mar-a-Lago. He's not flying commercial. He's or on a tiny little charter. He's on his branded plane, Trump Force One, and again, not nearly commented enough. And I may not write a book. I might, but if I do, this will be a big part of it. The contrast with Biden, both during those 4 years and now, the massive advantage for him stylistically in terms of ability to be, do photo ops of energy and to be on the right side of 70-30 issues. Now, he's on the wrong side of some 70-30 issues like abortion, like Medicare and Social Security, depending on how you ask it. Although he's tried to stay on the good side of that, the Democrats are determined to put him elsewhere. But what transpired during those 4 years is not been sufficiently understood or written about or reported on. And I hope I do it. If I don't do it, I hope somebody else does it. But it's an incredible story of failure on the part of the Democrats. And we're seeing the fruits of that now to some extent, because we say, what are the Democrats doing to fight back on USAID? They're scrambling, and they're doing a pretty poor job of it. There are things, if they had anticipated this, there are things they could have been doing that I think would have been more effective, but they were just lulled into a sense of 4 years of, well, this guy's going to prison, not to the Oval Office.
I mean, I think what's important about this is the things that you would think were advantages for him might have been things that you would have thought were disadvantages turned out to be advantages. The one that I think of is, I think we all understand, if you look back at the arc of the last 5 years, that it was the raid at Mar-a-Lago that consolidated the idea that the Republicans were going to wander away from him and wander over pretty much to DeSantis, maybe to Haley, but really to DeSantis, was stopped in its tracks by the raid at Mar-a-Lago, except that substantively, the raid at Mar-a-Lago was the only part of the lawfare that seemed legitimate even to people on the right who believed that Bragg and Fani Willis and Jack Smith in Washington were doing bad. It was, he had classified documents. He didn't have the right to have them. He was moving them all over the house to hide them from people who had come in good faith to get them back, to bring them back to the National Archives. It's like he was caught dead to rights. That's what it looked like. And the fact that that moment, not the indictment in New York, not the loss of the Trump case with the Attorney General of New York, but the case that was the strongest against him, the fact that the FBI raided the home of a former president who had commanded who was the leading candidate for the Republican nomination in 2024, was a blunder the likes of which we had never seen. It didn't look like a blunder at the time. Exactly.
It did to Donald Trump.
Right. Well, he knew instantly.
But also,
right, he went instantly. He said, they came to my house. Who am I? Basically, it's like, who am I, Elian Gonzalez? Like, they come to my house and stick a gun in my face? This is the way you treat the former president of the United States? This is the way you treat the leader of your party, he said to Republicans? And then, yeah, what the hell is this? And so I'm just saying, the interesting thing is his weakest point turned out to be his strongest point. And that's how far afield everything had gotten in our understanding of what it was, because we had never had a person in this position before, how gingerly the Democrats should have been treating him.
And then that weak point turned into a strong point, got stronger when it was uncovered that Biden had his own classified documents. I understand it was under different circumstances. It was more cooperative. I get all that, but still, the appearance of symmetry there completely.
Well, that symmetry, and then you had the
neutralized.
special prosecutor in the Biden case saying, "Well, I could have indicted him. I had him dead to rights. I could have indicted him, but he's senile, so I wasn't going to get a conviction." So that was the later hit. That was 6 months later.
Yeah.
The case that ended up knocking Biden out of the race was made But it's like, yeah, Trump got indicted on this. I could indict him. I could indict Biden too, but he's a vague old man who doesn't even remember the year his son died.
Yeah.
Gee, it's like, so then he got a twofer
Right.
out of
Yeah.
out of that.
If I do the book, one of the things I'll write about, which again, it's barely been written about, it kind of it's on the nose as I'm about to describe it, is the three prosecutors really would be in the top 10 of people who helped elect Trump. You'd say Susie Wiles, Chris LaCivita, and the three prosecutors. In terms of their failure to read the room, uh, I can make the case, as John, you and I agree on this. The Florida case was the strongest, and the others were anywhere from ridiculous to highly flawed in their substance, but in the timing, right? And you put it of a piece with the efforts to keep him off the ballot. Like, read the room. People don't think this is an appropriate way to treat a former president who's the front runner for the presidency, not just for his party's nomination. To bring all this stuff in the end, right before the election, and for Jack Smith to constantly say, "Well, this isn't about politics, but we really need to have this trial before the election because the voters are entitled to know how the trial comes out." And for the judges, at least some of the judges, not all, but particularly the DC judge, to be in cahoots on it. It just, as you guys have said, it turned a weakness into a strength, but it didn't happen by accident. It was Trump, like Bill Clinton did, taking advantage in an aggressive, almost like primal way of the mistakes of his opponents. And those three prosecutors who claimed to be above politics and who claimed to just be, going by the book, they were highly political, much more political than's been reported, I believe, in every case. And they, like I said, top 10 helping Trump win.
We have interesting things that are going to happen over the course of the next year people haven't sort of thought of in terms of reminding Trump, using them to remind people of what they tried to do to him. Alvin Bragg, right, who secured the 34 convictions against Trump, is up for re-election in New York in November as DA. We have our mayoral and local elections here in New York in November. He's been a bad DA. Aside from everything relating to Trump, he's been a bad DA. At this moment where he prosecuted this, Daniel Penny, who was saving people on the subway car from a violent schizophrenic who unfortunately tragically died in the 6 minutes that he was being held down. Penny charged and tried for manslaughter. And the city feels less safe. Manhattan feels less safe. All of that. And Bragg's going to be running for re-election. Trump doesn't have a big political base in Manhattan, but he has a big political base in 49 other states in the union. And if there's a serious candidate to go against Bragg, that person, with Trump's help, or maybe not even needing Trump's help, could raise $100 million to run against Alvin Bragg. I mean, and that will remind people, if his hold over the Republican Party loosens or weakens or stuff like that, could remind Americans who thought it all went too far, bring it back. Bragg's got to answer for, what happened here. And there are bits and pieces of that elsewhere. And so this isn't over. The lawfare, the use of lawfare for Trump as a political tool against his enemies is ongoing, in my view. I mean, there will be moments at which it will flare up again, and he will make, as he did, make brilliant use of it, because he understood how useful it was in a way very few people did, I think.
Yeah,
I certainly did.
I agree with you, but I also believe that, again, Donald Trump and his operation are like Bill Clinton and the Clinton operation, which is in part blessed by his enemies and the incompetence and iconography of his enemies, but also by the ability to turn anyone who's present there into an enemy, and to use the tools of the digital era, which Bill Clinton didn't have. Case in point this week, Politico Pro, right? Politico Pro is the Alvin Bragg of February of 2025. And I can't tell you. I mean, I find myself in the strange position of defending Politico Pro, for whom I previously carried no brief. But I just am so outraged and intellectually annoyed by all the disinformation about it. But I mean, my Twitter feed is filled with people telling me that I'm, corrupt and support of corruption because I'm defending Politico Pro. But I think just as a case study of what the Trump people have done this week with Politico Pro, as the political analyst Pink would say, effing brilliant.
Yeah.
They're just cynically pretending that Politico Pro is as bad as Jack Smith, and it's worked for them.
Look, every couple of years there is a absolutely preposterous issue that pops up, particularly in populist circles, that sort of sane hands go, what the hell are you? Yeah, of course, government agencies subscribe to expensive newsletters. They've been doing it forever, and maybe it should stop. Maybe it's a good budgetary. If Jimmy Carter were president, he also would have said no one's subscribing to $1,000, $10,000 a year newsletter. I'm turning the thermostat down to 58 degrees in the White House, and no one's buying a newsletter. That's. But I'm thinking of things like Dubai Ports World and the Ground Zero Mosque issues pop up where they grab hold of people in ways that you don't expect, and that you can say the mosque isn't anywhere near Ground Zero. Didn't matter, right? You could say it was 5 blocks from Ground Zero. It wasn't like
It's pretty close.
Okay,
It was pretty close, John.
okay, all right, but
I'm not sure the 1 block versus 5 block
okay.
question was the
Anyway,
dispositive issue.
I'm perfectly happy that there was no mosque by and there never was going to be anyway, because it was just it was a real estate, it was a fundraising scam. Anyway,
Yeah.
But Dubai Ports World buying the Port Elizabeth, New Jersey port, and how could we allow that to happen? And it's sort of like, what are you talking about? Who cares who owns a port? But having that kind of rational response to an issue that flares up, that people that are full of outrage about. And the Politico Pro one is fantastic because it's the idea of they're just scratching each other's back. So Politico gives liberals good coverage, because they're spending $38 million on subscriptions. By the way, I'm happy to start a commentary pro. We'll charge $10,000 a year. I don't know what you get for. I've never seen Politico Pro. I don't know what you get specially from Politico Pro. I'm sure it's not worth the money that it costs, but still, it's like you don't know when those issues are gonna pop up. And like making use of them is part of the game of politics. Serious, sober-minded people like you, Mark, can say this is not the way it works. It's ridiculous. It's preposterous. No one's subscribing to buy off Politico. But it doesn't matter. It's already, the damage is already done, or whatever. It's just been a kind of this week's rallying cry. Next week there'll be another one, presumably. And the Doge stuff, by the way, is I said this yesterday on our podcast. For 20, 25 years, this was a habit in Congress, particularly on the Budget Committee. Bill Fulbright and others pouring through the federal budget to find horrible examples of out of control spending. Proxmire. Did I say Fulbright? Proxmire. Right.
You did.
Yeah. Horrible examples of government spending, but that was always Congress, and it was like a press release that made you feel silly. Someone's doing a cowboy poetry. There's a grant for cowboy poetry. There's a museum for, hockey sticks in somebody's district, all of that. This is the first time, as far as I can tell, that such a thing has come out of the federal government. That's what's interesting about it, is they're just, it's like low-hanging fruit. Oh, we're supposed to be examining government waste. Well, we just open up this one. Let's just open up this one ledger at USAID. Oh, a transgender comic book in Paraguay or Chile or wherever, or Uruguay. I don't remember what country it is. $38,000 for a transgender comic book. It's like shooting fish in a barrel. And Trump is there. Those people are there now, very practiced at feeding the conservative media beast, and then making making people say, no, Politico Pro, you're getting it wrong. That's not Politico Pro is fun. I mean, what are you talking? It's like once you're explaining, you're losing something
Yeah,
like that.
And it
just to be
can
clear,
go on for 1,000 days in a row because they have a
yes,
list of things
Yeah,
every day
exactly.
they could
yes,
read.
yes.
Yeah,
Just to be clear, I think Politico Pro and their sales team shouldn't be the issue. But I
right.
do think the issue of government spending, and also someone brought this up on Two-Way the other day. Citizens, a woman came on and she said, like I have a small business. I don't get, I don't have $10,000 to buy some special data that the elites get to understand what's going to happen next. I think those two issues are totally legitimate and should be discussed and action maybe should be taken. But to turn this into a scandal about Politico, receiving grants from the federal government, I mean, the whole thing is just ridiculous.
But funny.
But funny,
It's
funny.
funny. It's funny.
Not
That's the
not
other.
for the people at Politico. They don't think to think it's funny.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they don't want to. They don't want to be. They don't want to expose the fact that they're getting that even there. Maybe it's fine, but the fact that they've gotten a $38 million out of the federal government for subscriptions is a little cheesy. So
Well,
I
and
look. I like I
they're going to
say.
lose.
Yeah.
They're going to lose the money, and I wouldn't be surprised if they started to lose some of their corporate, DC lobbyist
Yeah.
business because people will be like, well, what's this line item you're charging us for Politico Pro? Like,
Yeah.
you know,
It's amazing.
Wait, so
But
so
I
I
also
mean,
think
is this like an existential threat to Politico?
no,
Yeah.
it's not.
no, but
It's not.
I think the Political Pro issue has salience because it sort of distills what Trump's argument about the symbiosis of all these institutions and insiders, and it's not even the money. It's the I mean it is the money, but it's not solely the money. It's this the blurred lines between everything that he calls the establishment, and it enables him to call everything the establishment, and it puts meat on the bones.
Well, Mark, you used the term iron triangle earlier, and I have to say that the phrase "iron triangle" is the work of my friend and my former colleague at the White House, Clark Judge. He and I were speechwriters together at the end of the Reagan administration, and he wrote a speech about the iron triangle of media, government, and I can't remember what the three parts are, but
The interest groups.
interest groups. And the idea is basically right. It's not that there's a conspiracy. It's that they come from the same schools. They eat at the same restaurants. They hang out together at the same parties.
Their kids
Interest,
are at the same
yeah,
schools.
and their interests are congruent. And that therefore this was, this is not the military industrial complex in a way of it's a culture in Washington, and it's real. It's very, very. If you ever lived in it, and I didn't, I lived adjacent to it, and like dated people in it when I was not myself in it alone, that kind of thing. Like it is a real thing. It's the elite culture that is interested in governance and policy in the United States. There are other forms of elite culture like Hollywood and others that aren't that interested in this, but this is, and Washington is the epicenter,
And
and it
and
is
it
a
was
thing,
for
and it is, yeah.
sorry, and it was for decades one of the asymmetrical advantages of the left.
Right. So we've kept you too long. You got to prepare for your 9 a.m. morning meeting. As we are taping this, it's now, I don't know, 8:45 or something like that.
Yeah.
So I don't want to keep you too much longer. I don't want to keep our listeners too much longer. So yes, Mark's morning meeting, 9 a.m. on
On
YouTube.
YouTube and on X at twoway.tv.
Right. And it's a really great way to get a sense of what's on the agenda that day, and then 6 p.m. the summary of the day with a rotating cast of characters, not the
Yeah. And we have guests, and yesterday we had two doctors on who talked about the mental health crisis on the left after Donald Trump's victory.
right.
That was pretty compelling how they described their practices.
And if you not that it's Politico Pro, but Mark does have an elite newsletter, and if you're a person with some
Means. Yeah.
disposable income, you
Yeah.
could
It's
look into
expensive.
it. Is
It's
fantastic.
expensive.
It is
Thank
it
you.
is our favorite newsletter, and
Thank you.
fortunately,
Thank you.
but yes, so that is called,
walkingduck.com/Mark is where you can learn more about my concierge coverage newsletter.
okay. So
All right.
Mark
Thank
Halperin,
you.
And
Thank you, gentlemen.
is there a
great to
Mark
have you.
Pro?
It is
Everything
pro. It is the pro.
It is Pro.
everything I do is pro. It's not, I tell my friends who write for Politico that they write for Politico Amateur. Thank you, gentlemen, for hosting me again. And I apologize for the technical difficulties I had.
I was fine. This is
Okay.
life in the 21st century. So we'll be back on Monday for Abe and Seth. I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.